A ruler should be faithful, but also deceptive, just, but also ruthless. Being faithful and just can win the hearts of men, since we human beings are prone to favoring the ideal world. However, we live in a world where gentleness can be quickly perceived as weakness, and reality bends towards the wills of pragmatic men. Being kind and generous with the people can make the nation hold you in adoration, but one should know when to act with fierce ruthlessness. This is where wisdom and virtue play their part, and there is nothing more wise or virtuous than a leader who can quickly adapt to circumstances, cunningly bend fate to their will, and enforce calculated ruthlessness. Machiavelli, a wise political philosopher, didn't use the word virtue as a moral trait like we do today. Political virtue is a specific set of characteristics required of a ruler, such as adaptability and foresight. For instance, in chess, you may be losing or maybe even running out of time on the clock, but if you are down to a queen and a knight, you may be able to cunningly evade defeat. Though your queen is the most powerful asset, you can cunningly sacrifice it and bait your opponent with the queen to decisively checkmate with your knight, despite it being a weaker piece. Politics and society are the same. Rather than always playing the part of the morally pure, one should treat the political court as an observation of human nature and a game of chess. Fortuna is the goddess of fate, a volatile but kind goddess depicted as a blind woman, impartial to all, whether rich or poor, man or woman. In Roman mythology, she was viewed as Lady Luck that could bring prosperity or sudden catastrophe. Machiavelli describes Fortuna as a cruel force, comparing her to a monstrous river that devastates anything in its reach. Famine, war, and natural disaster incite suffering and disorder, which can threaten government authority. This is indicative of Fortuna's hand at play. However, virtue is like a shield and a scourge of war for a ruler, in which they can protect themselves and bend Fortuna to their will. A wise ruler could tame Fortuna by simply beating it like a beast into submission, and those who allow Fortuna to besiege them and make them despair of life are but weak and effeminate. Virtue is imperative in foreseeing disaster, so one might be one step ahead of Fortuna, or perhaps staying clear of Fortuna entirely without a drop of sweat falling from the brow. King Zeus was an ancient Spartan king and conqueror who enslaved the inhabitants of the city of Hellas, rendering them as the famous Helots, the slaves whose bodies were strictly owned by the Spartan state. He conquered as far as the Arcadian region, to which he annexed into Spartan territory. It was told that when Zeus was being besieged by the Clitorians in a wretched spot without water, his men began to suffer and die of dehydration. In this manner, he consented to give up to the Clitorians the territory to which he had conquered by means of war, only on the condition that the Clitorians allow all Spartans to drink from a spring close by. By mutual consent, they harmonized under a secret oath. Zeus subsequently set his own men aside and in secret offered to bestow the crown and kingly territory upon the one who restrained themselves from drinking. Not one man but King Zeus possessed the ability of self-restraint. He thus walked to the spring in front of his men and the enemy and did not drink, but merely splashed himself. Through this simple act of not drinking, he monopolized the land, attained glory, and prevailed despite being besieged. Cunning, self-restraint, and foresight are cohesive in establishing power, overcoming the enemy, and maintaining order. Zeus had skill, strength, and wisdom. Through cunning, he fulfilled an oath without breaking it, while simultaneously fooling the enemy into fulfilling their side of the bargain without any bloodshed. Zeus was wise and had foresight in seeing how fragile human nature is. Every human has primal instincts such as hunger or thirst, but not all humans have an intellect powerful enough to restrain themselves from fulfilling the urge. Exploiting this weakness is the mark of a true king, entitled to rule over the masses and lead an entire people. Fortuna tends to throw odds at leaders in the battlefield, but she loves nothing more than unleashing her full power in times of government reorganization or regime change. When a new rule or monarchy is established, it starts off in a space of great instability, and the inhabitants may be quick to rebel if they think they can improve their circumstances. In times of regime changes, people may grow deeply upset with the conquest or war that subsequently led to many mistreatments. In times like this, one must entertain the interest of the nobility while keeping friendships with the inhabitants. Machiavelli described it as how an illness at the early stages can be hard to diagnose but easy to cure if you can spot it with a keen eye. But as time goes by, it's relatively easy to spot but hard to cure. If one is shrewd enough, they can spot it fast and early, but if you let it grow big enough for everyone to see, it would be no use trying to stop it. When a ruler changes regime and takes the state, the odds of him staying in power are incommensurate with his political skill or his failures. When Alexander the Great came into power, his father's subjects were quick to rebel, but through ruthlessness and ability, Alexander maintained order despite his youth. Machiavelli presented Moses, Romulus, and Cyrus as great leaders who became sovereign while combating disorder, but held on to their states with ease through exceptional ability or virtue. The most dangerous thing to organize that is prone to failure is the reorganization of a regime or government. Enemies will be made of all who are comfortable under the ways of old, and once they see an opportunity to rebel, they'll take arms and create a faction, hence the importance of a ruler imposing his vision by force on the people, like how Cyrus, Romulus, and Moses did. Love, fear, and cruelty can be a great tool in cementing authority. Being the beloved of the nation is a trait attractive to rulers compared to being seen as cruel, but it is absolutely imperative not to be reckless with compassion. Machiavelli described Cesare Borgia as particularly cruel, but his cruelty was justified because it restored unity, peace, and order in Romagna. Ironically, Cesare Borgia's cruelty was compassionate in contrast with the Florentines' obsessive clinging to compassion that ultimately caused utter disorder and catastrophe. When the subject is keeping people loyal and maintaining peace, a ruler should totally negate the worry of looking ruthless or cruel. Like when King Solomon came to power, he executed his brother for asking his mother for the deceased King David's concubine. Since Adonijah had already tried to campaign for the throne, the concubine's request was the last straw. This calculated ruthlessness prevented what could have been a civil war. Solomon, as a brand new ruler, was shrewd enough in finding the illness and curing it early. To use the words from Virgil's The Aeneid to relate to Solomon, the difficult situation and the newness of my kingdom forced me to do these things and guard my borders everywhere. All while ruling with ruthlessness and cunning, one must also be humane, just, and kind when wisdom deems it time to be. Machiavelli famously questioned whether it is better to be loved or feared. It is ideally best to be of both worlds, But love and fear can often be like mixing water with oil. Machiavelli argues that if one were to choose, fear would be most wise. Love as a ruler is based on generosity, which often comes at a price. Thinking you can win loyalty through love only is folly. Of course, in times of peace, men would want to stay on your side and give you their whole being, but in times of danger, they would switch sides. Friendship and loyalty are not truly possessed or sustained on just love, and surely cannot be relied upon, especially when your ability or exploits have not created that love. Human nature is self-interest, and as soon as the love does not serve them, they will be inclined to deal with the ruler treacherously. Fear can be a great weapon because it causes the individual to restrain themselves in fear of punishment. When fear is used with great calculation and foresight, it can inspire dread, respect, and marvel, which is ultimately awe, a godlike aura. The people would fear the ruler as an absolute power that can cause immense destruction, while equally loving the order, peace, and strength he provides. But on the flip side, the quest to inspire fear must be acted with great caution and foresight, so as not to become bitterly hated as a tyrant. Caesar crossed the Rubicon River and prevailed in the war over Pompey and the Senate. Caesar did not want to follow the example of Sulla in cruelty. Once Sulla won the civil war in 82 BCE, he went to extraordinary lengths to eliminate his enemies and even seize tremendous amounts of wealth. Sulla was responsible for the proscriptions, which was a list of people who were condemned to death. His close friends, soldiers, and allies could add names to the list in his authority for personal gain. People would be added to the list merely because they did not see eye to eye with another. Innocent people were added to the list because their property was highly coveted, and business rivals were neither spared. Sulla auctioned these properties to his allies, and though the aristocracy suffered, they also became extremely wealthy under his rule, which means their love was bought at a huge sum. But to keep their greed and self-interest in check, they were reminded that the same list that destroyed their enemies could also destroy them. Sulla was a realist. He was thorough in exterminating all his enemies to establish his rule. To protect himself from the immense hate, he kept 24 bodyguards and thousands of armed freed slaves who used to belong to his enemies. Caesar, however, took the opposite route. Though he didn't order mass executions, he also did not appease the self-interest of the aristocracy. Caesar fatally mixed love and fear like oil and water. Unlike Sulla, the love for Caesar was not bought, but was attained because of his character, exceptional qualities, and abilities as an individual. He was highly favored among the people for his spirit and his exploits. Caesar was aware of this love and became too confident in it. Through his mercy towards his enemies, he eventually became careless, even placing Brutus and Cassius in high offices close to him, and further dismissing his bodyguards so as to not look like a tyrant. It is understandable in an ideal world how showing great mercy to a bitter enemy is like, in quote, heaping burning coals on his head, to quote the Bible. Theoretically, profound kindness should make the one who is the hater ashamed of his hatred and conduct, but in the brutal realm of the political court, and especially in circumstances of a brand new regime, being kind can backfire. In the aristocracy, dignitas was everything, and there was nothing more humiliating and undignified than being indebted to an enemy who overpowered you in the aspects of life and death. Caesar's folly of overwhelming mercy allowed his enemies to use it as a pretext to assassinate him. If Caesar thoroughly eliminated his enemies, while simultaneously appeasing the self-interest of the Senate by making them feel like they still have aristocratic tradition and power. Perhaps Caesar may have lived longer. His reckless mercy is what gave birth to the wars and instability that came after his death, to which Augustus nipped in the bud. A ruler must know when to act and when to refrain their hand, to be as shrewd as a snake and as harmless as a dove. In Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Zarathustra looks up at the sky and sees the profound spectacle of an eagle flying in perfect harmony with a snake around its neck, and describes them as his friends. The eagle and the snake are historical enemies, but spiritually they must be unified. The eagle is pride and spirit, illustrating the loftiness of ambition and power, while representing vision and ruthlessness. The snake is wisdom and instinct, showing the power of cunning and the deception of subtlety. A leader must make these two sides become one, so as to attain the right virtue to bend fortuna to their will. Self-restraint, wisdom, and foresight are the ingredients of a well-sustained state. Machiavelli sheds light on how painful life is and how far human nature has fallen. Being pragmatic and doing what works proves useful in comparison to clinging to moral ideals to fulfill the delusion of making heaven here on earth. But I mention again, like before, one should take great measure and caution to not inspire hatred